It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. You're live with Expresso. Men, I want you to listen up right now because this is a conversation that we need to be having with each other. Women are a vital part of the conversation, but ultimately the men who need to hear what we are talking about, they are the ones that need to connect now and take responsibility. As we approach the annual 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children campaign, it's time to take a hard look at some unbelievably grim stats. So amid a huge underreporting of rape and sexual assault cases, over 40,000 cases of rape and over 7,000 for sexual assault were reported for 2020 alone, underreported. And our rate of intimate femicide is 5 times higher than the global average. We also need to understand how this reality is affecting our country's women. Today, we are asking what is the impact on women in abusive and violent relationships? And our good friend and clinical psychologist, Asha Dullabh, is here to help us have a very difficult conversation, and we'd love for you to weigh in as well. So please, if you've got any comments or any questions, statements, proclamations, head on to our Expresso Facebook page to do that. Asha, I've been thinking about this from so many different angles, and I say this unequivocally because I think we've gotten to that point now. We know that this is a conversation that men need to be having with other men. But we are engaging right now to empathize in some way and get an idea of what is actually going on. Because we've reached the point now where we need answers. Yes, we've got outrage and we've got disgust, understandably so, but we are still not finding the answer. Maybe a good place to start, and I've often drifted into the space of thinking maybe it's socio-economic is what's driving it in this country, because clearly something is driving it here more than anywhere else in the world. Why do South African men rape and abuse and murder?
Sure. Yes, Graham, it's a heavy one today. I think thousands of years of patriarchy has laid the groundwork for gender inequality to start off with. And of course, there's this perception of a man needs to be a real man, which means that they need to control and stand in their power. And, there's this idea that a woman is a man's property, a possession, a trophy that needs to be controlled. So the big question is, why is it that one human being actually has the need to control another human being? It is so rooted in false perceptions of superiority, of false perceptions of women are inferior, men are superior. And we've normalized it, Graham, and that's why we are sitting in this crisis.
There are activating factors. Alcohol plays a massive role, and we've seen that, hence the need to ban alcohol every time we have forced people to go back into their homes with each other. And we know that there was a massive spike in domestic violence because people, I just keep thinking about that terrifying situation of being trapped with your aggressor, with your attacker every day. The socio-economic, I think we all tasted desperation. And for me as a man, that desperation of having my financial security shaken, as was, I think, many of us during COVID, that feeling made me act out in all sorts of ways that I never would have expected. What are these issues tied to? What's the link here? What do you think is pushing it from just this societal norm to now acting out and actually, in many cases, murdering the person that you are ultimately closest to?
It's fear, Graham, the emotion of fear, the experience of fear, the survival mode that we are in through the whole pandemic of COVID. Think about what has unfolded in homes. And it's rooted in, really going back to one's own traumas and one's own childhood, the impact of what they have been raised, the environments, what they've seen
for their whole life.
For their whole life. And as I said earlier, we've normalized it. Violence is a learned behavior that's intergenerational. And that's why the dialogue is so critically important right now. We are requiring a global commitment to this pandemic at the moment.
It's a pandemic. It is in itself a pandemic. We are talking about gender-based violence and the effect that rape, that violence, that murder perpetrated against women and children in this country is having. Yes, thanks so much, Jamie. It is a Monday, so we are talking relationships and having a very hard discussion to have, but one that is vital. What is the impact of women abuse in relationships, abuse towards children? We are back with our clinical psychologist, Asha Dullabh, to unpack this very difficult topic, so please weigh in with any questions and comments on our Facebook page. You want to visualize this. We talk about the unseen, as we were speaking about a moment ago. Just visualize, if you will, an entire football stadium filled with rape victims. Over 40,000 rape victims in 2020. That's a football stadium filled of women who have been abused in the worst kind of way. What is the continued effect of abuse and this kind of this mentality and this physical abuse, because it comes from both sides. It's not just a physical manifestation, but there is an emotional and an intellectual component as well. What effect does that have on a woman?
So the ongoing control, Graham, has an effect of overriding a woman's autonomy, their sense of self. They begin to start feeling quite humiliated. They experience severe mental illness such as depression, suicidal ideation, anxiety. Alcohol and drug abuse also on the increase. But we see it in, when there's disease of the mind, there's disease of the body. So it has an impact not only on the individual system, but the collective system, the economy of our country. It is huge. It's completely debilitating, and it breaks down our society. And it all begins with our children. We need to raise our children with higher levels of EQ from a place of the heart. We are bypassing the heart when we're raising our children.
I see it so often trying to engage in interview kind of scenarios where there is a complete lack of an emotional intelligence. We don't have the structures within our society, within our schools, within our families to develop this. At the heart of this, and I suppose it's a battle being fought on two fronts, we need to address it first with men and change the culture. We also need to empower women somehow through this. Why is it so difficult for a woman to get her power back? And what can a woman who is stuck right now in this abusive cycle do for herself to make herself a little bit safer and to just change that narrative? Is there an answer, or does it have to be done on a bigger scale?
So when a woman is going through an abuse, or whether it's domestic abuse or physical or sexual or coercive control, there's a lot of emotions of shame that come up, a sense of failure. They question themselves. And, when this is happening, a woman is in complete fear mode. They're in survival mode. They are fight, flight, freeze, or fold mode. They are trying to get out. They try their very best to get out. But one thing what we must remember of the victims is it's very often even dangerous to leave. They fear
That's
for
when
their
they're
life.
at their greatest danger.
It's actually more dangerous when they leave. So they need to equip themselves with a safety plan. Putting into place their protective factors, developing the protective factors, connectedness with family, developing their self-esteem, their self-image, their courage within themselves to be able to take that step when they know it's ready. But remember the impact of the dangerous fear that they have. It's so dangerous for them to leave. So, many abusers will withhold finances. They stalk their partners for years end. Their whole aim is to make sure that the woman is totally depleted on every level by this continuous abuse. That's why the fear is so profound, which just debilitates that woman. So the woman that stands in their power is one that is courageous. And very often, some women don't see themselves as a battered woman. Some women are strong women that are actually in relationships with dysfunctional men who they just genuinely care for, and with their sense of hope, they try and make a change. They always
see the better side, yeah. We'll get back into that conversation that you need to have with your daughter, with your son, in terms of changing that narrative. But for that woman who is caught in the cycle right now, what is the first thing? Because what you're saying is they're probably not going to be able to do it alone. They're going to need support from somewhere, whether that's an organization that is primed to help them or a family member. and I guarantee you there is help out there. We are primed for that at least. What should that first step be? Do you talk to a counsellor? Do you speak to your father? Do you speak to someone to have that plan, set a date, say, I'm leaving at this date and this is what needs to happen? What is that first practical step?
You know, violence breeds in silence. And so there's the silence and the secrecy that breeds it. So is break the silence. Start telling and speaking your truth to your friends, to your family, to your neighbors, to police. Reach out for help. As you say, there is help. But the first point is breaking the silence, which is often the area where women don't feel strong enough to speak up because they actually don't trust the systems that are in place to
Understandably
actually help.
so, yeah.
They don't trust the law, they don't trust the protective police stations because they fear that they will not actually get the protective means that they so dearly need. So they shy away from that and they try and fending through this whole process by themselves. So we're needing a sense of community and a sense of that connectedness to be able to share your story. It's very important because the silence is what actually perpetuates the continuous pattern of violence.
A continuous pattern that if we don't stop now, we are simply going to be left as a nation of survivors. That's all that's going to be left here. But we have an opportunity during 16 days of activism to shine a light on domestic violence perpetrated against women and children. But this is a culture that is going to hold the country back. And it needs to happen with the individual and it needs to happen on scale with the men.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Repeat that hashtag to yourself as many times as you can. Enough is enough. At some point, it's got to sink in. Well, it is a Monday, so we are continuing our relationship chat. And today we are asking, what is the impact on women in abusive relationships? Part of a much bigger story, we know, but right now we are focusing on the women that are at the moment under attack. And we are back with our clinical psychologist and good friend, Asha Dullabh, to unpack the topic. And please, if you want to weigh in, let us know on our Expresso Facebook page. Continuing our conversation that we've just left off on, obviously leaving an abusive or a violent relationship and an emotionally or verbally abusive relationship can be as damaging. We've covered this before in terms of what it can do to the psyche. But it's a process and one that can be fraught with danger. Probably the most dangerous part of an abusive relationship is that phase. How does a woman know that she is ready and what can she do to get herself ready to be at that point to say, okay, this is it, I'm making a move and making a change?
The woman will definitely know the time is right to leave. And in order to prepare that is to have an action plan, a safety plan. So gather your tribe of support. That is very important. You need to have support. You need to think through your economics, your financial resources. You need to be able to work on yourself before actually taking and making that move. Because you need to have that sense of spontaneous faith and trust in yourself and in the system, that there is a system that will support. Search for your, in your environment, in your community, for organizations that are there to help. Reach out to those organizations because there's so much that is happening to help women. And I think that with time, Graham, we need to develop systems where there's more training for healthcare professionals as well as our police stations.
Definitely.
To know how to deal with these kind of women, because I think that there's a lack of training. And with more organizations taking on the projects to educate, I think that we're going to have women that will be coming forward and speaking their truth so much more.
And at least we do have a much brighter light being cast on it right now. We understand that. If it becomes clear, and I'm speaking about the economically disadvantaged women in this country, because most of the women living in this country within abusive relationships don't have the support structures that would be necessary to guide them out of this phase. When they know that the next step is likely to be murder, they know that they are not safe going through this process, what do they do then if there are no answers? Do they go to the police? Do they go to an organization? What do you do in the most extreme case?
You take action and immediate action. You go to the police, you speak your truth, you tell everyone so that people know. Once you break your silence, there's a feeling of liberation that takes over. There's a sense of empowerment because somebody else knows. Because where there's those secrecy and silence, you feel completely isolated. And once you can sort of get out of that isolation in yourself, you already passed the first and most important step. So that's very important.
Let's go to the grassroots level. It's easy to feel powerless in this situation, and I'm not directly affected by it. So I can only imagine those that are directly impacted by it must be feeling powerless to the maximum degree. So then how do we start this conversation? What conversation should I be having with other young boys and men, my son? How do we change this narrative?
It's really going right back to the way we raise our children. Speak about the values, speak about how to treat another human being. Let's take away gender, just human values, human rights, because it's an invasion of one's human rights, a sense of belonging, a sense of safety. Those are the kind of conversations that we need to be having. At the grassroots level, we need to look at the way we're actually addressing the COVID virus is the way we need to address gender-based violence. There needs to be a global commitment to this.
And a constant push until we get a solution.
Exactly. Yeah. And a vaccination process in terms of having an injection of education, of training, of awareness, and continuous booster doses of this awareness campaigns and education, because it doesn't stop with just a few conversations. It needs to be continuously spoken about. 16 days needs to extend as a daily
365, yeah,
conversation every single day, because it's affecting our women and our children globally.
I know I had to turn you into a professor of economics and socio-economics today, so thank you so much for kind of broadening your scope this morning. Well, yes, we know this is a conversation that needs to be had between men, quite frankly, and your actions are going to depict what your sons, how they see and act in this world. But to women out there, while we know this is not your responsibility, somehow within this you need to be able to take responsibility for yourself. And maybe that first step is identifying when is the right time to do something about it. And hopefully this opportunity will be your time right now.